It's funny because you talk about God. One of the guys I live with is a very devout Christian. We talk about,
which you once were, right?
Well, I was an atheist.
Okay.
And then I educated myself. And then I was a Christian for a while. But I think I reverted to that because I was raised Christian. So I was like, I believe in God again, so I'm a Christian. And then I read the Bible, and then I read the Quran. And then I found an affinity with Islam. And it's a very interesting conversation because in a lot of ways, they're a lot more similar than people realize. They're actually very similar. But I don't feel qualified to discuss Islam like that because it's a very complicated religion, and I'm a revert. I'm only 2 years in, and I'm learning. But one of the guys who lives with me is a devout Christian, and we often have these conversations, and we talk about these things.
And your brother's a Christian.
My brother's a Christian, that's right. And he says, when we talk about these things, he goes, Jesus is coming back. It's fine. Jesus is coming back. So I'm like, but Christian nations need to stand up for themselves, and you need to do something, you need to fight. And he goes, but Jesus is coming back. And I said, I don't prescribe to that particular mentality. And it reminds me of a story from my dad.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you say you don't prescribe to that mentality, do you not believe Jesus is coming back, or you just don't believe in that mentality you just described?
I do believe, let's say I believe Jesus was coming back. That wouldn't mean I don't take action. That wouldn't mean I just wait.
I agree with that.
I don't agree with it's going to be fine, it'll be fixed by Jesus. No. I'll give you a quick example. My father was a world-class chess player. He was a professional chess player. I used to go with him to chess tournaments. We were at a chess tournament. I think we were in Chicago, Illinois, and I must have been about 8 years old. And Azerbaijani grandmaster turned up, and he looked visibly shaken. And he's from Azerbaijan, so he was not used to driving on ice. And he came in, and he looked visibly shaken, and my dad and his friends were standing there, all the chess players, and he said, what's the matter? And he goes, God just saved my life. God just saved my life. And we're like, what happened? He said, I was driving on the bridge and I lost control on the ice, and I was heading towards the edge of the bridge, and the car wasn't responding, and I just closed my eyes and I prayed to God, and I opened my eyes and I stopped just before I went off the bridge. I broke the barrier. I nearly went off the bridge. God saved my life. God saved my life. And I remember my dad said, maybe God saved your life, but I wouldn't have taken my hand off the wheel. And that was his mentality. And I remember him saying, I was only 8. I remember him saying that and walking off. And I talked to him about it on the way home. What does that mean? He goes, well, God has a plan. That's great, but I'm going to do my very best while I'm here. And God will allow me to either succeed or he won't. So we could sit here and say, Jesus is coming back to save Christian nations. Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps you should stop letting yourself get punked all day and stand up and do something. Perhaps. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But it truly breaks my heart when these things are happening.
Well, no, you're right, because faith without works is it's meaningless. But let me ask you, very interesting, because you said you believe Jesus is coming back, and yet you're Islam.
So does Islam.
They do?
Yeah.
So they believe that Jesus is the Son of God?
Yeah.
Okay.
They believe he was a messenger.
They don't believe he's the Son of God?
I have to be, I don't want to say anything incorrect, because if I say anything incorrect, the Muslim world jumps all over me. But they do believe he was a messenger. They believe he was a prophet, along with Muhammad and along with Moses. They believe in a lot of the same things. I guess the very simplistic way to understand or explain Islam is they believe in the Bible. They believe in all of it. They just wrote one more book afterwards by one more messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him. And in his book, he said, Christians are right. Everything's right. But there's also this part. That's the very simplistic view of it. I don't think the problem is Islam versus Christian. I don't think the problem is God versus God. I think the main problem with the world today is godless versus believers. I think if you have somebody who believes in God, all the religions have a basic tenet of look after your family, do the right thing. God is watching. There is sin. There are some things more important than money. You know, like in Islam, we don't have usury, for example. There's no interest allowed. It says in the Quran, if you have a society based on interest and based on debt and based on banking, you're going to be controlled by evil. It says in the Quran in the 14th century. So like there's you have spiritual beliefs. And if you don't have any spiritual belief, you're only going to worship money. There's nowhere else to go, right? And if you worship money, you're corruptible. So I think that people who are spiritual as opposed to people who are atheistic is the main problem, because the atheists aren't even atheistic. They worship LGBT, money, government, feminism, abortion, whatever insanity. They have their religions. They're just evil. So there's no such thing as an atheist anyway. They just have completely insane religions. Right. I believe that people who believe in God versus people who don't is the main problem. I think a lot of the confusion, though, about Islam is a lot of the problems in the Western world are from migrants, perhaps, or from people who are from Islamic countries. So people have a problem with Islam, which I can understand. But I would argue that the problem there is not Islam. The problem is third worlders versus first worlders. Some of the first world Islamic nations are the most beautiful places on earth. Bahrain, Kuwait, Dubai, United Arab Emirates. These are gorgeous places with no crime. And you're going to see with no tax. And the tallest buildings in the world, perfect roads, 0% tax rate.
No tax.
Yeah, no tax. Explain that, government. And they built these beautiful places and everyone's safe and society functions and everything's gorgeous. Obviously, you have third world Islamic nations with problems. You can go to Africa and find third world Christian nations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you will see how they treat women. People say, oh, Islam's bad to women. We'll see how they treat women in Africa and Christian nations.
You're right.
It's third world versus first world.
Let me ask you, is there a reason you were drawn more to Islam than Christianity?
I read both books. I don't know if it was my time inside of in Islamic countries. I felt God. I felt it. I don't know how else to say it. I felt it. I felt it more when I went to the mosque. I felt it when I was in an Islamic country. I felt it. And I've analyzed this about myself heavily because I believe that feedback is how you get good at anything. People think practice makes perfect. That's a lie. Feedback makes perfect. And I was actually discussing this with somebody who was talking about my podcast. He says, oh, your podcasts are very good. And how do you talk so well? And I said, well, he goes, you must be practicing. I said, I don't practice because I'm 37, you're 42. You've been practicing longer than me. So how come I can speak better than you can? Because I watch myself back and I analyze, I learn new words. Feedback is how you get good at something. So I try to analyze my own state of mind all the time. And I try and work out, why did I feel like an Islamic society was closer to God than a Christian society? Is it because of what's in the book? Or is it because of the society I'm in? Is it because of the society? Maybe. And I'm just being perfectly brutally honest here. Maybe when I look at religion, I say, well, if a religion, what's the primary goal of a religion? Is it to save souls? Yes. But also, wouldn't you argue the primary goal of religion is to preserve a society to a degree? If Islam can preserve Islamic societies, if women are women, if men are men, if even in war zones, even you can look at the worst countries on the planet today, they're Islamic countries, if they're still all praying, they're still all with their wives, they're still all feeding. God is the only thing they've got. They don't have anything else. They're not afraid to die for what they believe in. God is all they've got left. You know what's interesting? Someone said to me, they said, imagine when you look at movies and you see a post-apocalyptic Christian country, like, something's happened. You see riots, you see looting, you see all these things, right? He goes, there's a bunch of Islamic countries right now that are already post-apocalyptic. You don't see any of that because they believe in God. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's just I felt it hold society together. And I'm not going to sit here and argue that I'm right. I'm not going to argue against Christianity at all. I respect Christianity. I was raised Christian. I have absolute respect for Christians. My brother's a Christian. I'm not going to sit and say that I'm right and anyone else is wrong. I'm just saying perhaps it's as simple as if I send my children to school in Dubai, 99% of the problems we've talked about, I don't have to worry about anymore. Maybe it's that simple. It's like, okay, boom.